Mise en place, all it means is everything in its place and a place for everything. So it's just a fancy word for having your shit together.
You said it way fancier than I did too. Mise en place.
Well, I had to take 3 weeks of culinary French when I was in cooking school. So,
oui, oui.
With my New York accent, I have to try and do better.
Oh, that's hilarious. All right, let's do it. What's up, UX fam? How's your mom and them? Welcome to another episode of Beyond UX Design. I'm Jeremy. If you're new here, welcome to the show. I am super stoked to have you. And if you haven't done it already, please consider subscribing to the show wherever you listen to podcasts. And if you are a regular here and you feel like you're getting something out of the show, I would really appreciate you leaving a 5-star review. That'll help me out so much more than you can imagine. This week's episode is brought to you by Jeff White and his UX Storytelling Toolkit. Now, lots of people talk about the importance of storytelling for UX designers, but Jeff brings actionable clarity to the concept, and he shows you exactly how to do it. He breaks down different real-world scenarios, like how to use different storytelling methods to present your work to clients and stakeholders, how to craft a better case study for your portfolio, and how to improve portfolio presentations for job interviews. And I love Jeff's approach to storytelling here. It's not just your simple once-upon-a-time kind of stuff. And since you're an amazing listener, and I know this course will help you out so much, I've partnered with Jeff to get everybody listening a 10% discount if you use the code BeyondUX when you check out. So head on over to beyonduxdesign.com/storytelling and use the code BeyondUX at checkout to get 10% off Jeff's storytelling course. So go learn some incredible techniques to influence your team and advance your UX career. This week's audiobook recommendation is Kitchen Confidential: Adventures in the Culinary Underbelly by Anthony Bourdain. Kitchen Confidential is a raw, behind-the-scenes look at the culinary world. And in this audiobook, which is actually narrated by Anthony Bourdain himself, he shares his journey from novice to seasoned chef, revealing the high-pressure, chaotic kitchen environments that he's worked in. He talks all about the realities of professional cooking, making it a captivating read for anybody interested in the true nature of culinary arts, and it ties in perfectly with our show and our guest today. So head on over to beyonduxdesign.com/audible trial to start your free trial and download Kitchen Confidential completely free and help support the show in the process. And as always, thanks so much to Chris, Siraquan, Stacy, Radu, Megan, Andrew, John, Mark, and Kevin for all their support. And if you want to join those fine folks and help keep the show independent and ad-free, you can become a patron for as little as $3 a month. That's less than $1 an episode. And if you do that, you'll get some sweet, sweet perks for your support. And of course, if you think the show is worth sharing, then I would love it if you told some friends. Now, I've talked a little bit about this throughout my various interviews that I've done here on the podcast, but I've got, all through college, I spent my time working in restaurants. And for a long time, I thought I was going to go to culinary school to become a chef. Then I got a job in a restaurant and I realized how miserable that actually was. And I decided it's not for me. I ended up getting into UX design. But I've been watching The Bear recently. I don't know if anyone out there has seen The Bear. Fantastic show. I think it's on Hulu or something like that. I don't know exactly, but it's about this guy. He opens a restaurant. It's all about the chef. Very realistic. It gave me flashbacks of how realistic it was. And I thought, there's so many parallels here to UX design and software in general. So I went out and I found my good friend, Anne Cantera, who is a UX designer, but she has a past life. She was an executive chef. She went to Culinary Institute of America. And I said, she would be the perfect person to talk about the parallels between UX design. So Anne, welcome to the show. I am so excited to have you on. How's it going?
Oh, it's going good. Super, super grateful for the opportunity and to chat with you. I feel like we talk about this subject every time we meet, so we might as well make it official.
Make it official. I love it. Yeah. And when I saw The Bear, the first thing I thought about was just like the grueling nature of working in a kitchen. But what a lot of people don't realize, I think, especially people coming into UX design, is UX design can be very grueling, not in the physical aspect that working in a hot kitchen with, sharp knives, fire, getting burned and all that stuff, but it's very grueling mentally, which, not to say working in a kitchen is not grueling mentally, but UX design can be a very grueling thing, especially if you end up in a place with relatively low maturity across the board. So I want to talk a little bit. So before we do that, let's give everybody, establish your street cred out there, Anne. Tell us a little bit about you and how you got into, from working in restaurants, ultimately into UX design. I think that's even a fascinating story. So let's kick it off there. Tell us about you.
Well, It's not a sweet story, at least not to start out with. I got my first restaurant gig when I was about 16. I liked it because I didn't have to get up till noon. My shift started at 2.
Oh, wow. That's
And I
late.
would work till about 1 a.m. And I liked that rock and roll lifestyle. I was all about it at the time. At 17, I left for the Culinary Institute, and I was
Wow.
the youngest kid on campus, and there was 20 males for every female.
Oh, man. Wow. And you were
I was
17.
already
That's young.
tough by then because I had been bullied in elementary school. So I was already pretty tough by 17. So it really didn't phase me. I graduated with a 3.9. I really
Wow.
kicked butt while I was there. I apprenticed with Wolfgang Puck.
Oh, wow.
Um,
That's awesome.
I came home and just started to work. And it is grueling. It is bad pay. It is no benefits. It is more hours in 3 days that most people work in a week. There are no weekends off. There's no holidays off. There's no nights off. It's rough. I love the Bear because it's the only, and I say only because I've seen them all, it's the only media that has really, really depicted the true nature of how brutal it is. That said, I did it for years. I did it with every child. I had 3 kids. At one point, I had a 6-month-old, a 6-year-old, and a 12-year-old, and ended up getting nominated for Best Chef on Long Island while raising 3 little kids.
Wow.
I
Oh, that's
don't
impressive.
recommend that. I was living on 3 hours of sleep a night, and it wasn't sustainable. But I did it, and it's a feather in my cap. And then I just couldn't do savory anymore. I just was over it. And I just wanted to do something more artistic because I grew up designing and painting and doing mosaics and just being an artist in general. And I started doing really high level custom cakes. So I started a cake business out of my home. And I did that for years and years and years while I raised my kids. So what happened after that was I was getting too big for my little home business. And it was like, time to pivot. Like, do you get a storefront? Which I knew better because I'd been in the business forever. And I knew I did not want that responsibility. Or do you turn and pivot back into tech? I worked in tech for a while in between restaurant work. I did a
Okay.
couple years, what back in the Flash days.
Yep.
So I did work in tech for about 3 years back then. And then I always would joke that the food business was like the mafia, as like just when I think I'm out, it pulled me back because I was new in tech, but I had been around the restaurant business and I couldn't turn away that executive chef salary with kids for the entry level salary of tech. So I went back to doing that. And then long story short, 5 years ago or so, I pivoted back into tech and I haven't looked back because even the roughest parts of tech are still easier than the mediocre parts of the restaurant business, as far as I'm concerned.
Oh, yeah, I heard you. Yeah, it's funny you mentioned bringing back a little backstory about me. I was actually, all through high school, I thought I wanted to be a chef. So when I went to college, I actually was going to go to a school down in Thibodaux, Louisiana, Nichols State University. At the time, at least, this was 99. It was the only public school with a culinary program. And I was going to do that, and I was going to go, and none of my other friends wanted to go to Thibodaux, to Nichols. So I was like, well, I got to go where my friends are going to go. So I ended up going to LSU, and I still wanted to be a chef, though. So I was like, well, I'm going to get a job at a restaurant while I go to school. So that was what I did. And I worked in kitchens and stuff. And I've worked at a restaurant with the guy who graduated from the CIA, from Culinary Institute of America. And he was going to sponsor me and another guy to go there. After working in the kitchen, I was like, I think I was making like $7, $8 an hour. And I had friends who were waiting tables and they're making $20 an hour, hundreds of dollars a shift, and I'm like, what am I doing in the back of the house? Like, why am I not waiting tables? So I ended up moving to the front of the house and waiting tables and bartending. So I did that like all through college. I made a decent amount of money. And when I actually graduated, my first quote unquote real job, I think I was making like $24,000 a year. I made like almost half of what I made bartending. And so I would actually go and bartend on the weekends because I was just to make extra money. And it was like, it kept pulling me back. But it's funny you mentioned that it brings you back in because I feel like you get addicted to that adrenaline rush. It's stressful, but at the same time, it's like an adrenaline rush. It's like, I don't want to compare this to like combat or anything, but like when people in the military get out of the military, they miss it, right? Because there was that like adrenaline and, it's just so mundane. sitting in a desk and all the commotion and this and everybody yelling, and I don't know. Anyway, it's sort of addicting. And when I saw the bear, it made me like miss it a little bit, because it had been arguably a decade or more since I had been working in a restaurant. I posted about it on LinkedIn. I think I said something like, "Oh, I miss it." Anybody miss going back in the restaurant? You're like, absolutely not. But you did it a lot longer than I did. I think you way more deeper into it than I was, for sure. But one of the things that got me thinking about this was this idea of how similar crafting a customer experience or user experience, even more broadly, I think a better way to think about it is really customer experience. How similar that is to a restaurant, And when you think about it in terms of customer experience versus UX design, which is what we often think of as interface design, right? We're designing for a screen. But when you think more broadly about customer experience, I mean, that is exactly what restaurants are doing. They're creating a guest experience, and everything has to work in tandem, and everyone has to work together in order for those guests to have a great experience. You can't have people fighting in the back and, front of house, back of house, not cooperating and fighting with each other. It's all got to be this seamless sort of flow, which I loved about the bear. You mentioned it was really super realistic. That, how they talk about, how the front of house and back of house work together in the pre-shift meetings, which I've never seen really before on TV. But anyway, I want you to talk a little bit about that from your experience. Compare and contrast, software with restaurants.
I'd been living this for a really long time, like knowing that there was a lot of overlap and knowing that there were a lot of similarities. But until you asked me to do the podcast, I never kind of put it to paper. And then when I did, I realized that it's so in depth. Like there's so many ways that they are similar and the process. And so I wrote it down because it was so cathartic to finally do. Because it was always some sort of floating around in my head, but never organized. One is planning and preparation. Two is user-centered approach. Three is iterative process. Four is attention to detail. Five is workflow efficiency. Six is prototyping. Seven is collaboration. Eight is empathy. Nine is adaptability. And 10 is feedback and integration.
So let's dig into some of these a little bit. I want to start with that idea of start with planning. And this was something that I actually had thought about creating a solo episode for this months and months and months ago. And I just never did because I actually thought, I was like, I never really worked in like a restaurant kitchen really, but like this idea of mise en place, you had a better way to pronounce it. How do you pronounce mise en place, which is, French. So it's all, you gotta say it in a fancier accent than I did. But that idea of, getting everything in its place, everything has a place, and really setting yourself up so that you can be as effective as possible, as efficient as possible. That's really, restaurant industry. You gotta be fast. So talk a little bit about that idea of mise en place, sorry, and how that kind of applies here as well, as I feel like that kind of ties into this idea of planning.
I feel like the ultimate example of mise en place is a design system. It's like all your ingredients, your vegetables are chopped, your meat is clean, your fish is filleted, and everything is just all set up and ready to just be grabbed and used as it needs. So I think that's one most designers can kind of wrap their heads around. That's the equivalent. Like the design system is the equivalent to the whole restaurant ready to do service at 5:00 on a Saturday night, right? Or like, a group of icons, maybe just one group of ingredients ready for one dish, if that makes sense.
I love that idea. The other thing too, I think about when I think about this, the idea of start with planning. For me, I do a lot of strategy work now. I do a lot less of the actual interface design. And for me, having a template ready to go for project kickoff, having a set of questions that I know I need to ask, what are we doing this for? What are the ultimate problems? What are the outcomes? Who's in charge? What are the stakeholders? Blah, blah, blah. Having my RACI chart ready, having these I use Miro boards. Some people might use Fig Jams, but having these boards ready to go for a project kickoff, having various templates for things like a repeatable process for a service blueprint, having that template ready and the files ready so I'm not recreating it each time helps me to be more efficient. So, I feel like it's like one of those things like across the board, again, for software. If you're an engineer, This would have been a great panel discussion to have, like someone from product engineering on too. But someone from engineering, you're going to have your file structure, everything's ready to go. Your product manager is going to have their charts and whatever product managers do. They're going to have their stuff ready, and this idea of just getting everything ready to go, to me, it just applies across the board. And that's where I go back to with like restaurant versus software. It's not just UX, it's like the software is the similar piece. Like UX is one part of that, but there's a sales piece, there's a brand promise, there's a brand in general, which would be the restaurant, right? There's a menu, which would be sort of like the sales site, right? Like all that stuff, the advertisements, obviously, the how you get people in the door, how you get people coming back, there's so much stuff there that's like, I think even bigger than UX, which is why I like to think about it as like CX. But anyway, I don't know. Maybe we'll do this again. We'll have a big panel discussion.
It'd be fun. Decide who's front of the house, who's back of the house.
Any former chefs or restaurant people turned product managers or software engineers? Find them. That'd be great. All right. So I love it. What else? Any other thoughts about this idea of planning?
I think that's one of the easier ones to kind of wrap your heads around. Everybody has their process, right? On both sides, on the food side or on the tech side. The process is a little bit different, right? And it's a little bit different in every restaurant, right? Versus, you plan an app a little bit different than you would plan a website, or you would plan a breakfast restaurant a little bit different than a fine dining restaurant. But everybody has their planning. You have to do it. It's unavoidable.
You know what? You just made me think of something. Is like part of the problem I feel like with software in general is you have these teams that become like feature factories, and they end up being feature factories because they aren't really thinking about a North Star or vision. And you just made a great point. If I'm a breakfast restaurant, right, I'm going to avoid certain dishes. I'm not going to go try to create, like, I'm not going to have a caviar menu. I'm not going to have a champagne list, right? I'm going to focus on breakfast related things, and I might experiment and play around with breakfast stuff. But I'm going to have a very different menu from like a French restaurant down the street, and often like in software, a lot of these teams, I think they'll just say, well, some other team is building this crap. Let's go build something similar to try to compete with them. But you've got to know what the outcome is for your software and who your people are, who your audience is, who your users are, and what the target is, and focus there to solve a problem. Like I'm going to a breakfast place because I want some goddamn, scrambled eggs. I want the best scrambled eggs and omelet like I can get, and you can play around with that genre. It could be a diner, could be like a really fancy French inspired breakfast place with really fancy omelets, but that's your, you know what I mean? I don't know. Does that make sense?
Don't bring me swordfish at 8 a.m.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So being a feature factory is similar. Yeah. I get that 100%.
All right. What was the next one on your list? What you got?
User-centered approach.
I love this
which is interesting because if you have a taco truck and you have a Thai restaurant, your user-centered approach is going to be very different from each other.
Right.
And I think that happens in tech as well.
From your perspective as someone from a restaurant, how do restaurants generally think about that idea of user-centered approach? Is that something restaurants usually start with, like, who is our customer, or do they have a concept and they sort of go from there and then try to find their ideal customer after they've already established a concept?
It depends on the founder. I've worked for people who have never worked at a restaurant before. One time I worked for 2 lawyers. They didn't have a plan. They just flew by the seat of their pants and prayed for the best.
And how did that work out for them?
They did it right for a while.
Yeah.
The food was really good. They hired well.
That's the trick, right?
Yeah. And if you hire a really good executive chef and you pay them well and they run the show.
And stay out of it and let them do their job.
Do not unsolicited feedback on minutia is a bad idea.
Now, so here's this is a really great parallel too. I know we're talking about users, and I don't know if you had on your list with stakeholders or something like that.
Yes.
Like this is sort of like a great example of that, right? And maybe is that on your list? Because we could talk about that when we get there.
Yeah, it is. But
yeah, okay. So we'll talk about put a pin in that one. We'll talk about that when we get there, because that's another thing. Trying to influence people. It's like they're experts. Let them do their goddamn job. Stay out of their way. But yeah, this idea of like of that user-centered approach, is kind of interesting because I've never run my own restaurant. I've been worked in restaurants, but never actually ran the place. So I wasn't in charge of anything as an executive chef. I'm sure you have a lot more experience here. But that idea of crafting an experience around what your people want is a little different from software, because in theory, software is, I have a problem I'm trying to solve. Let me go find the people who need that problem solved and figure out exactly what they need, and I'll design it for them. Versus a restaurant where, you know, does the world need another restaurant? Right. I mean, it's sort of a frivolous thing. So it depends on the restaurant, like
It's more
fine
like a
dining.
game, right? Like you're
Yeah. Yeah.
crafting a game versus, a piece of
Right.
software.
Frivolous is the wrong word. I guess you don't need to go to a restaurant to survive, I guess. Although, I don't know, maybe you don't need a software to survive either. But, anyway, I don't know. It's kind of, what are your thoughts there? I'm kind of curious. What's,
I think a lot of software solves like business problems, and the restaurant is a business. So I think that's one key difference there. But you know what? It doesn't matter what business you're talking about. A happy customer is a happy customer, and an angry customer is an angry customer. And you don't want angry customers. So it doesn't, it's all relative, really, in the end.
you made me think of something just now. A restaurant down the street from us just recently closed. And they did an article in the local paper about what happened, because they were open for like 40 years. And one of the things that this guy had said was they became a destination, right? And the problem with that is you don't go to a destination for anything other than special occasions like anniversaries, birthdays, things like that. And it was hard for them to just fill the restaurant on a Friday or Saturday night, because they became known as the special place you go for special events, And so it's kind of interesting when I think about that. It's like tailoring to your audience in that case. Like, you almost dig yourself in a hole, because then you become a place that you don't think of to just go on a regular Friday night for dinner anymore.
Well, do you know about what happened with Noma?
No, no.
Okay, Noma was like the best restaurant in the world for years. And they closed their door last year, claiming it's just not sustainable to be what we are.
Because they were the fancy, like, yeah, they have a certain aura about
Well,
them,
it's
or
like, dinner is $1,000. Just in general, the pace, the stress, once you have those Michelin stars, you're expected to keep that pace. If you lose a star, you might as well close your doors. And it's just inhumane. And I think that was part of what they meant by not sustainable.
yeah, that sounds fascinating. Yeah, I guess it's sort of similar, right? Like in that case, part of it, and this is something I don't think a lot of software teams think about. Product, well, software companies, I don't know that they necessarily think of like the people that work there. Meta and Google and places, I've heard horror stories of people working there, how stressful it is. And I don't think anybody there really cares, because there's a million other people out there that want to work at Meta and Facebook and wherever, and they're willing to put up with the bullshit. But it's interesting for like a restaurant like that to think about, like, it's stressful for the owners, it's stressful for the employees, it's stressful for everybody involved. You can't keep that up at a certain point. You have to say, let's just, like, I'm going to go open up like a coffee shop down the street and forget all the other stuff.
It's like quitting carbs. You could do it for a while,
Yeah, but you need them
but
at a certain
eventually
point.
you're
Your body
like,
eats itself. Yeah.
yeah.
The other thing too that I think about is, just like customer focused is maybe an interesting way to put it. Is, you have a certain set of customers. Maybe you're a neighborhood restaurant, maybe you're a downtown fine dining establishment, but you know who your clientele is and you know what they want. And it's similar to the point before about, don't bring me swordfish at 8 a.m. You have to know what people are coming there for. And you can't just go and build, offer crap that they're not going to want, to turn them off and maybe, have them, aside from the offering, it's even just about, the service. And, that's the other thing I loved about the Bear, like the stuff that they would go through to, make sure these guests had a great experience. Like that, I don't no spoilers for anybody out there, but that one episode, maybe that was Forks, or I can't remember, where cousin goes and he runs to get the pizza, and then they go in the back and they create this special meal for this customer. That's something they're going to remember. When we talk about delight in UX design, that's delight. That's something
Above and
that,
beyond. Yeah.
yeah, that's something they will remember
The
forever.
chocolate covered banana.
Wait, what was that? What was that? Is that in there?
That was one of the last episodes. He had mentioned that his father had brought him a chocolate covered banana as a child in a passing
Yes, that's right.
conversation.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And he remembered it.
And
Yeah,
then, yeah, they served it to him for dessert, and he got tears in his eyes because
yeah.
it brought him back to that place. And
Yes.
I mean, Listen, I work for Wolfgang Puck. I've dined at a couple of places that are really high up there. I've never seen anything like that. I think that might be a little
A little
tiny bit
exaggerated.
fiction mixed
Yeah.
in there. There was a couple of mistakes, couple little tiny mistakes.
Yeah. But yeah, it's funny. This is a totally off topic, I guess. But back when I was a kid, you've probably heard of Commander's Palace down in New Orleans. Very, very
Yes.
fancy restaurant. My dad took my sister there for her 18th birthday, and she is picky as hell. She is so freaking picky. There was some special that night. It was like a chicken breast with all kinds of crab stuff with this and sauce and blah blah blah. So she was basically, can I have the chicken, but no that, no this. I don't want that other thing. But it's basically just like a grilled chicken breast,
Uh-huh.
at like this fancy fine dining restaurant. So they bring it out, chicken breast, and I think like fried potatoes or whatever it was. And then she asked for ketchup,
Yep.
and they were like, "Sure, we'll get some ketchup." Anyway, they went down the street to the store and bought a bottle of ketchup because they didn't have ketchup,
Oh,
brought it to the table, and then, this is the best part, they put it on the bill.
ah, well, that's me. I mean, I'm a little
So
sensitive to the subject because you just described my husband and my kids.
yeah,
And
it's
here
hard to
I
take.
am like, let's put a Flushing, get tea
Yeah,
smoked duck and curry
yeah,
goat. And they're like, we'll have a burger.
yeah, that was so funny. But that idea, they went out of their way, but then, I don't know, somebody was like, "Yeah,
It's a
we'll show you."
light,
Well, yeah,
right.
but we'll stick it on the bill.
Yeah.
But anyway, I don't know. That idea though of just being so focused on your users and understanding what they want and why they're there and how you can help them. And again, that idea of like outcome focused is something so many teams I feel like just miss. And it's just like, let's build this crap, let's build that crap. And they don't realize, again, the idea of feature factory, they're just building junk nobody wants. It's not there. I'm not
Right.
there for that.
You have to
So,
deeply know the people and you have to deeply know their problem.
yeah, I love it.
Yeah.
All right, next one. What you got? What's the next one?
The next one is iterative process, which is my favorite one because I love recipe development.
Yeah.
It's one of my favorite things to do is like, because it's the epitome of Kaizen, right?
Yep.
Like I made it this way and it was good and everybody loved it. But to me, it was like, it was all right.
I know it could be better. Yeah. So this
Yeah.
is interesting too. And this is something I think is also very similar to software. In the Bear, Sydney, was it Sydney, right? Sorry, that was her name. Sydney and Carmi, they go and or I guess it was just Sydney. She goes out and she tests all these various menu items at all these various places. And she takes notes and they did this well. And to me, this was, very similar, I think, to what we do in software where we go, what are our competitors doing? How are they doing it? Can we do it better? Can we do it differently? What makes us unique? Why would someone want this over that? But one of the things that I think was really fascinating about this was when Sydney and Carmi are in their kitchen and they're cooking and she thinks it's perfect. Carmi tastes, he's like, no, you can do better. It's like that idea of pushing ourselves, but there's also that idea of like perfection could kill it, right? If they could get to the point where they're just, it's not good enough, it's not good enough, it's not good enough. They have that deadline, they got 2 weeks, 3 weeks, whatever it is. And they just can't say at a certain point, like, you know what, we could do better. It's good enough for the opening night.
Yeah, but her user testing was also faulty.
Yeah, how so?
Because she was testing it on everybody in the kitchen, but she was testing it. She didn't take it to customers.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
She didn't. She only when she took it to Carmi, he was the first really distinguished palate as she brought it to. So her research was kind of skewed.
Yeah. Very biased. That's a good point. Yeah.
Yeah.
So they were all, of course, they're going to like it. They work there. They want it to be good.
And she's their boss.
Yeah. Okay. Yes. Oh, I love this. Yeah. This is really good. All these cognitive biases coming into play here. Yeah, I love that. But yeah, that idea of, at certain point, like we have to ship something. That idea of perfection over, I hate to use good enough because good enough is the wrong term there, but the best we could do given the constraints, given the time we had, but that idea, Kaizen, you could always improve it after we release, after we open the restaurant, 2 weeks from now, we could change the menu. This menu is not written in stone. So anyway, I love that idea. Tell me more about that. Any other thoughts?
Well, you know what? I see this. It sounds like it's a tangent, but it's not. I see service design positions all the time, and I think I would be so good at that. But I couldn't get the time. Would never be able to get an interview because of just my portfolio and my resume. But when you talk about running a kitchen, every single item that comes out of that kitchen is between 5 and 20 steps. And each one of those steps, you're crafting the quickest, most effective line from A to B, 5 to 10 times for every menu item, even a cup of coffee. So talk about iterative. So say I run a special for, I don't know, broiled lobster, right? And we're slammed. It's a Saturday night and I miscalculated. I'm cutting lobsters in half to order. And that one special is putting the whole kitchen in the weeds because it needs to be iterated. The process needs to be iterated on. So on Friday or Saturday, I'm completely in the weeds. Sunday, I run it again. Sunday, I'm pre-splitting those lobsters. So it's not just it's iterative and just not
Yeah,
just
that's a great
in
point.
recipe,
Yeah.
but in
I
process.
love that. Yeah. Right. Yeah. How we work with our software team for one sprint versus another sprint. And that's the beauty of something like Agile too, is, you're breaking these 6-month, year-long releases up into 2-week sprints or however long your team does a sprint. And you can, and that's what I love about retros too, right? Like and this is why I think it's really important for UX designers to go to retros every sprint, because you have an insight, you have input into how the team overall, not just the UX team, can improve anything. I mean, that's the beauty of that agile kind of idea, right? And Scrum. So that's a really great point. I love that you call that out because it's not just the design. It's not just the file structure, whatever. You can improve process, meetings, how we meet, how often we meet. We didn't meet, so next sprint, let's meet and discuss this thing before we do a thing. And it's all about just process improvement, not just, design improvement or whatever it is, which again, I think goes back to the whole software team, which I love. I love that idea.
And I think it's important for newer designers to understand too that if you came up with something and it didn't work, it's okay. It's not personal. Like your process didn't work. It might work in another scenario and another day and another time and another place. Don't take this stuff personal. You know, I see that a lot, and it's not going to help your career. You just have to compartmentalize and realize we're talking about your process, not you, or we're talking about something you created, but not you. So separate yourself out of that critiquing process.
Yeah. So you mentioned service design, and that's kind of really like my job now is really more service design, strategy, research, putting all the things together. And one of the things that I think, this is very similar to I had a conversation with Bobby Johnson, who did this, he's baked cakes and he did a cake study and he used that experience. It's not a one-to-one translation, obviously, but he was able to create a case study about that and explain like his process and all that stuff. And he's been working now as a UX designer for a year or two. And I think in your case, like that idea of creating talking about service design directly applies. I mean, it's not a one-to-one translation, obviously, but the concepts are there. It's systems thinking. It's thinking about the bigger picture. It's not being laser focused on my little plate that I'm doing right now and making sure it's the most beautiful plate that guest has ever seen. It's the bigger picture. It's the bigger picture. It's all the stuff going on around you, just like you said. I think there's a lot of crossover there. And that's sort of, again, where I mentioned I had this analogy. So this is sort of my analogy for the restaurant industry and software. When you think about like all the various teams, right? Like I've heard people talk about, design as a team sport, quote unquote. And I've heard a lot of people push back on that idea that design is a team sport. But what they're really saying, and they use the wrong words, I think, but UX design is not a team sport. Design is not the team sport. Building software is the team sport. And crafting a really great user experience is a team sport. I've talked about this a lot, this idea that, UX designers can't control bugs. They can't control APIs being down, internet speeds, slow page load times, like all those things. The whole team, how the software is marketed and the brand promise, that's not something the UX designers generally control. So for us as UX designers to assume that we can design the experience is frankly a load of crap. We can influence it and inform part of it, but we're certainly not designing it. So that idea, though, of restaurants, you've got, front of house, you've got back of house, you've got, the servers, you've got the hostess, you've got, the people, the maitre d', maybe you've got a sommelier if you're at a fancy restaurant, You've got line cooks, you've got sous chefs, you've got all these other things. You've got, the marketing team who's creating advertisements and stuff. And when, you walk into the restaurant, right, and you look at the menu, you expect these teams to work in tandem to get you that meal relatively quickly, right? And you expect it to be what you ordered. You expect it to be on time and not cold. And, there's certain things. And when you think about software, I work in a giant team, and we've got multiple orgs, right? And this is maybe more true for a really big team. Multiple orgs, different priorities, different budgets. They often don't talk together. And I was having a conversation with one of our program managers the other day, and we're talking about how all these teams are building really cool stuff. They're all building really high-tech solutions for things, and it's amazing technology, but they don't talk. And then we go and sell stuff to customers, and the customers get this like disjointed, nothing connects, nothing talks. It's just a really weird experience. And I'm like, imagine you're in a restaurant and you've got a bunch of line cooks that are creating the most beautiful dishes in the world. One's creating this fancy Thai dish. One's got a fancy French dish. One's got, the best hot dog you've ever had. And there's no menu though, and they walk in and they're just like, nobody comes and talks to them. Nobody seats them. And so, one of the things that my program is like, do you think we have too many cooks in the kitchen? And I was like, no, we don't have an executive chef. We don't have someone crafting a menu. We don't have somebody planning this out. What is the experience and what do we want customers to be able to order? And how do we want to interact with them? Do we want table service? Do we want counter service? Are we going to do DoorDash? It's like none of these things are planned. And so the similarities though is like the customer has an experience, whether we plan it or not. And so you have all these teams that are working together or not. And at the end of the day, the customer has an experience, whether we plan it or not, And I feel like that to me is like a really great analogy, comparing and contrasting like all the different players on the software team, sales team, marketing team, product support. That's another one that can have a huge impact on the experience. Like when it breaks and no one can help me, that's not something the UX team can handle. But, that's something that directly influence the experience, So anyway, that's my analogy, but I just I love thinking about it in terms of something simple like that, especially when talking to product teams who don't really often, or business people who really don't know how to build software. That's not their job.
Remember when Richie had his moment?
We need an expo. Yeah.
Yeah. We need an expo. I actually had an interview this morning and we were talking about that, about like ambassadors from teams who can actually communicate with other teams. And now we can call them expos. Each team needs an expo to talk to the other teams.
Yeah. It's funny. It's kind of interesting if I think about like Scrum, like a Scrum master is almost like an expo, they're kind of like there to get things done, remove blockers maybe, but such and such, we got to get this done. What can I do to help you get this done? Very similar, like expo. Oh, that table's waiting for a thing. I need this now.
Yeah, exactly. I love that.
So anyway, I don't know, kind of a brand. I just thought of that, but anyway. All right. What's the next one?
Next one is workflow efficiency. I think this one weighs a little heavier on the restaurant side in my world, because if I decide as the executive chef, we're going to change this today, it can be changed today.
Yeah.
When you're on a big team, it's like,
and this one might be true for startups though. Like they're definitely more nimble, fewer people, fewer blockers to decisions.
Which is probably why I love the startup craziness.
Yeah.
It just makes sense for me.
I imagine working in a giant corporation is more similar to working at like a place like Chili's, like that kitchen team can't say, I've got a better way to do this, because there is,
no.
You can't change the recipe,
right.
maybe
Chili's
you could
coming
influence
in a bag from corporate.
Yeah. So there's no way for you to change that recipe. Maybe there's a chain of command. You could submit
there's a
something
process.
to say,
it'll take a year.
A workflow. There's a workflow,
right.
which is, I think, very similar to like a large corporate software team where, but that's actually, I hadn't thought about that one, but that's actually kind of fascinating to think about. We're definitely more like a giant franchise chain type of thing where we don't really control everything.
Right. I think this episode will definitely really vibe with people who've worked in the food industry and in corporate tech, like corporate tech, because it's just so relatable.
It is. I know. Man, I've been wanting to do this episode for so long.
Then I go to prototyping, which it's pretty obvious with that. what the crossovers there are, right? Chefs create prototypes in the form of recipes and test them and refine them before, finally saying, okay, this is dining room worthy. UX designers do it, in wireframes and prototypes. They test and refine and test and refine. So that's one of the more almost exact crossovers, I feel like.
And we talked a little bit about, like, in the example of the bear, keep coming back to that one because that was sort of the idea that sparked this whole episode. But, Carmi and Sydney, they're crafting their menu. They're trying different things. They're prototyping. And so, I mean, that's all, I can't imagine there's ever a scenario where a chef creates a recipe without trying it first.
Yeah.
It's never going to happen. I mean, even in when I'm making a recipe, can you imagine somebody like serving it without tasting it first to make sure it didn't need more salt or something? Yeah, that one's actually a really great example. And I think if you haven't worked in a restaurant and you have seen the bear, that's a really great example, I think. And you're an executive chef, so you would know better than me. But that seems like a really great example of how a restaurant may go about crafting a menu and putting all the stuff together.
Sure. And then you serve it and people complain about it, and something you thought was perfect turns out not to be so.
Right. Yeah. So it's kind of interesting for me coming from New Orleans. We moved up to the Midwest 3 years ago, and we moved to Cincinnati. And, New Orleans, everybody knows New Orleans for their food, obviously. So I'm thinking like, oh man, we moved to the Midwest. We're going to have like awful, awful food experience. And the first night we moved here, everything is in boxes. We like literally pulled up to the place like, a few hours before. So we go get some food. Highly, highly recommended restaurant. I'm not going to call them out on the show here, but highly recommended restaurant. So we get there, order the food, take it home. My 5-year-old at the time starts eating. And he goes, "Dad, why doesn't this food taste like anything?" And I was like, oh man, we're not in New Orleans anymore, dude. But it's the idea though, the palate of the people around here, everybody loved that restaurant and they weren't used to that salt, the salt and everything else that we put in our food down in New Orleans. Everything's very, very heavy when it comes to, intensity of flavors. But in the Midwest, that's probably a turnoff. People probably wouldn't want that, or if they did, they wouldn't be able to eat it every day.
You used to think.
Right.
Like I came up, I learned Slack first. And then when I went on Discord, I was like,
God, I hate Discord so much.
I hate this. But now, I've eaten enough Discord where I'm like, all right, I like this too.
On you. It's an acquired
it's growing
taste.
on me too.
Yeah, I love it.
And it's also like, people who leave New York, they're like, I can't eat a pizza or a bagel in California.
That's so funny.
Like wherever, So yeah, the palates definitely are different everywhere. And I think that's the same. It's the same with user experience. You get used to, like I came up on CorelDRAW. I used CorelDRAW before Photoshop.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
That's
back in the
long
day.
time ago.
For sure.
Yeah. And then when I had to move over to Photoshop, it was a difficult transition because I had cut my teeth on CorelDRAW.
Oh, I know. And
so it's the same thing.
Yeah. And that's interesting because that's something to think about too. And this idea of going back to, again, software, maybe even just humans in general, cognitive sort of biases, bias is the wrong word, but positive learning transfer. When I live in an area and I am used to that food, if I open a restaurant, I have to have something that meets that palate to things that other people are comfortable with, they're used to. That could be your gimmick, you're different, you're totally different, totally opposite of everybody else, but you probably won't appeal to a mass audience in that sense. And if that's not what you want, that's totally fine. But, if your goal is to appeal to a mass audience, you have to understand what people are doing everywhere else, or what people want, what people expect, what they're used to. And so very similar to UX design you can't reinvent the wheel just because you don't like buttons looking blue and underlined. Well, I get it, but that's what people recognize as a hyperlink, so you could play around with it. But if you, remove the underline and you just change the color and you make it bold, is that a link? I have no idea, especially if there's no hover thing over it, right? So it's this idea of like positive learning transfer, I think, again, sort of directly applies. Very similar kind of thing.
And there are points in time where certain pieces reach a pinnacle and they're perfect. Like Thomas Keller has a menu item called oysters and pearls. And it's been on his menu forever because it's like the perfect recipe. And there are instances in tech like Candy Crush. Candy Crush is done. It doesn't need to be
Right.
anything more than it is. It's pinnacle. It's reached its peak. But I think that's what a lot of the work we do. We're kind of striving for that pinnacle, but we all the challenges along the way and the blockers along the way kind of really slow the process in tech more so than in the food business. But there is a pinnacle. There is perfection to some level.
Yeah, that's a really great point. What's your next one on the list?
The next one is collaboration.
Ooh, this one is critical.
I think we've mentioned a lot of the different positions in a restaurant. Listen, the foundation and the backbone of every restaurant are the prep guys and the dishwashers. So let's give them a shout out to the lowest paid people there, the guys who mop the floors and plunge the toilets when they're stopped up. Without them, we have nothing.
Who's going to go to a fancy restaurant if the toilet's stopped up? Like you expect, right? I mean, you expect a certain level.
Any restaurant.
But yeah, I mean, especially, I mean, there might be some where you put up with it, right? But like for the most part, though, like you these people don't get a lot of respect. But I mean, you think about like who doesn't get a lot of respect in software teams? Probably like QA engineers, support technicians, customer support people,
Graphic designers, I feel like don't get enough love.
for sure. So those kind of people, I feel like I hate to compare them to like people cleaning toilets, but
there's honor in cleaning toilets.
There certainly is.
If you just got to this country and are doing the best you can.
Absolutely, for sure. And so, yeah, I think that's really important is to recognize that, you as a UX designer are not the most important part of the machine, or the cog in the machine. And, this is something I see quite a bit is UX designers get this sort of grandiose idea that they are the most important role in the entire software team. And if it's not for them, everything would go to shit. And I think that like, it's an important role. Obviously, I'm a UX designer, but everybody has a part. And if anybody screws up or doesn't fulfill their end of the bargain or doesn't pull their weight, the whole thing comes crashing down.
I think everybody needs to stop saying flipping burgers as a derogatory.
I agree.
Like that. I got into it with somebody on LinkedIn about this. Most people, after an hour, would run screaming from a McDonald's kitchen or a diner kitchen or a place where people actually flip burgers. I feel really strongly about that. That is not a quote that people should be using. You're still building skills, though. You're still learning, timing, and you're learning how to collaborate, coordinate. It's still, a valuable set of skills to learn.
All right. What you got? What's the next one on your list, Anne?
The next one was empathy.
This one's important.
Well, this one gets thrown around in UX a lot, not in the restaurant world so much. But what's happened the last few years is everybody and their mother is getting diagnosed with some kind of food allergy and intolerance. And you have to worry about that when you own a restaurant now.
Well, this is something I just can't stress this enough. Actually, last week I talked to Tom Griever and we talked a lot about this idea, but empathy for your team, empathy for the people that you work with. I think this is something that restaurants probably don't do enough of, but you mentioned they're a rowdy bunch, like I look back at, again, the Bear, and they're fist fighting. One of them, like his cousin got stabbed at one point, I mean, there's no empathy for the people that they work with, and I think this is something that, and this is a similarity. We're missing this, I think, often. You often hear, product managers versus UX and product versus engineering and engineering versus UX and stakeholders versus everybody else, so there's this lack of, this is the similarity. There's a lack of empathy for the people that we work with across the board. I feel like, we have to understand where people are coming from. And I think one of the, you could kind of see over time the progression of Cousin in the Bear, where he was very selfish. And over time, he built up this empathy. And towards the end, he's picking up for, at the expo station for helping out because, somebody else couldn't do it. I can't remember. Sydney had to go cook because Carmi got locked in the fridge or whatever. But, so that idea of empathy, and you kind of see that in the Bear where you take over, let me help you out. I'm going to help you out real quick. I know you got stuff going on. You take care of this stuff. We got to get this job done. I feel like that's something we don't see enough.
I think Richie's undiagnosed ADHD, and that's a subject near and dear to my heart.
Interesting. Yeah.
And when he found his niche, expediting, he was able to use his power finally. And I as somebody on that, was deeply in that world, I found that to be like a particularly hopeful moment. Like he was getting in everybody's way in the beginning and fighting with everybody and couldn't get out of his own way. And all of a sudden, the world around him clicked into place as soon as he took that expediter role. And I just found that beautiful.
Yeah.
I that was one of my favorite moments.
I love it. Yeah, that was a really good too. I was like really at first I hated him. I was like, this guy is such an asshole. But you kind of root for him over why, and you could see like his progression, building that empathy up. I think in Forks, in that episode where they sent him over to go work at this fancy restaurant to kind of get that experience, and he's very bitter about it, and then he realized like Carmy was doing it for him, and that's when I
Mhm.
feel like it clicked, and he wanted to help his team, and he realized that team, they worked together. They collaborated well.
And he got to see greatness.
That's true. That is very true. Yeah. He had to see it firsthand,
Yeah.
I love
Yep.
that idea. All right. Empathy for your team, not just your users.
I think we need to put a disclaimer on this episode. You must go watch The Bear before you listen.
I'm gonna put it in the show notes. If you don't have Hulu, I don't know what to tell you. I'm sorry. Go get a job in a restaurant, then come back in a year, and then listen to the episode.
And just get your friend's password.
So, don't want to get in trouble with Hulu.
Yep.
All right. What else? What's the next one? What you
The
got?
next one is adaptability.
Adaptability. I love this.
I love this one too. So your produce order comes. You have guacamole on the menu, and all the avocados are unusable.
Okay.
What do you do?
What do you do? What would you do in that situation? I'm curious as a chef.
I'd run over to the farm stand and buy another case, and then
Just buy a bunch
or I'd get on the phone. And this is where you have to be a little bit vicious, is dealing with your purveyors. And either at first I would try to make them bring me a fresh case and give it to me for free because of the heartache they put me through. And if that didn't work, I would send somebody to a farm stand. And if that didn't work, I would send somebody to the grocery store. But at that point, I'm losing money because I'm paying retail. So I would have to formulate my revenge on the purveyor.
Get some free crap next time. Oh, I love that. Yeah. So talk about adaptability in UX. What does that mean to you?
Oh, it's a lot. It's a lot more. I mean, you think you have this brilliant idea and somebody craps on it. It's great, but you're not the boss and you have to adapt.
Yeah. And so last week, it's funny you mentioned this one, because last week I talked with Tom about this idea of adaptability versus rigidity in UX design. And we get these people that are just so, they have this sort of principled concepts of what is and is not the right way to do things. And if you can't do it my way, we're not doing it at all. And, one of the things Tom brought up in that interview was, this idea that like, those are the people that other people hate working with. It's not to say give up and roll over every time. That's not the point. But there's a certain time and place for, that rigidity. And there's a time and place for that adaptability and going with the flow and being pragmatic and realizing like, I want to do this, but I can't. What's the best that we can do right now? Working with those constraints. I think that's something you don't really, I think, at least people I've talked to, never seem to learn in school. What it's actually like, the constraints, working with that stuff. It's this process, this theory that in reality often is very different. You can't have that rigidity, I love that.
I hear that a lot in Tech Fleet. I don't know if you know about Tech Fleet, what we do. Okay.
Give it a plug. I know you work with Tech Fleet. You could talk about it.
Well, it's just that we get a lot of people straight out of boot camps, and then they'll get a position with us and do an 8-week sprint and be like, I learned more in that real world setting than I did in my entire boot camp or college, or there's a big difference between learning and doing.
Absolutely.
And yes, go Tech Fleet. What we do is awesome. We're changing the lives of those boot camps graduates and getting them real world experience and helping them get jobs.
I love it. Yeah. Adaptability, flexibility. I think that's such an important thing. And to your point, it's not just about, design and stuff as well. I mean, it's about like the whole thing. At the end of the day, you got to ask yourself, what's the outcome? And how can we get that outcome given the constraints? And will we get it if I do not flex right now? If I don't give in right now, will we meet that outcome? And if the answer is no, maybe it's time to check yourself.
Yeah. One thing I kind of feel very differentiates me from a lot of the people in the restaurant business that I've worked with is I operate from zero ego, and that served me well across the board. I have a saying that I use in every situation is I'm not on your side. I'm not on my side. I'm on the side of the business.
I think a lot more people in software would do well to remember that for sure.
I think we'd have much better products out there.
We absolutely would. Yeah. And going back to my example with the big, orgs and the siloed orgs, these teams function as if their little silo is the most important thing. And what they fail to realize is like, if I don't collaborate with these other teams, I don't have to. No one told me to. It's not my job to do it, but it's for the good of the business and the customer ultimately. What's good for the customer in theory should be good for the business. So, being so like, I don't know, just like laser focus on your own little thing.
Yeah, zoom out.
Yeah, zoom out. Think about the bigger picture. I love that. What you got? What's the next one?
All right, last one. And this is my favorite because this is where restaurant and tech cross paths, like in the real world.
In the real world.
Feedback integration.
Yeah.
Yelp changed the game.
Tell me about this one.
Well, I mean, in the old days, your feedback would come from the humans in your dining room. We had 3 steaks come back tonight, overcooked. The shrimp taste funny. But Yelp changed everything because now people can leave a very specific dissertation about their deep hate or love for you.
Yeah, right.
And the problem there is most people on those platforms are there to hate. I try to go out of my way. If I have to leave something bad, I go out of my way to find another one and leave something good.
Sandwich.
Because you have to be balanced. Like if we want those platforms to really be true and work, you have to be balanced in how you give your feedback.
And so it's interesting because in this case, you're talking about a couple of things. You're talking about feedback from users, but also feedback to your team, and not just a critique. I'm not talking design critique. I'm talking about, but that too, but also, like, hey, product manager, we did this thing last sprint. I don't think it went very well. Here's how I think we could improve on it, or I have an idea to improve it, or, it would be great if you didn't talk to the team that way, or whatever it is that your feedback is. How do you give that feedback in a meaningful way that actually improves the relationship, because that's really the ultimate goal here is relationships. But also on the other side, the customer side, how do you get feedback? How do you take reviews? Because if you're a commercial app, you might be on an app store, you got a bunch of reviews. How do you handle 1-star reviews? That's actually another interesting thing too. Maybe there's a parallel. I can't tell, like I see restaurants sometimes will reply back to a 1-star review on Yelp. And I'm like, your response makes me never want to go to your restaurant.
Yes.
Like the way that you handled that is so inappropriate. You could have just not said anything. And I probably would have never thought twice about going to your restaurant because 1-star reviews are just like a dime a dozen on Yelp. But the way that you handle it makes me not want to go back. And I see the same on App Store all the time. The developer will reply with a 1-star review. And I'm like, you're a goddamn asshole. Like this guy was an idiot. This guy, like this guy was an idiot, but you're an asshole, And so that's the kind of stuff. Like I think there's an important lesson there for how you graciously accept feedback is maybe another parallel as well.
And I mean, you have to do it with humility, but also if you look at a restaurant that has 500 5-star reviews and 1 or 2 1-star reviews, people know. People are smart enough to know. Those 1 or 2, you're never going to satisfy them. I guess because of Tech Lead, I'm around so many fresh, young designers. Feedback is part of design, period. So if something you design doesn't go over well with the team or with users, it is not personal.
That's directly corresponds. I mean, culinary arts, it's an art. You put your soul into this thing, right? And you craft this thing and you feel like it's the best goddamn menu item ever. And then somebody comes in, it's like, it's too salty. There's not enough salt. It's too spicy.
Or it doesn't sell.
Or it doesn't sell. That's a good one. Yeah. You're like, why did it took all this time and no one wanted it?
And then staff was eating a family meal the next day.
That's so funny. Yeah, at least it didn't go to waste. But hopefully they liked it. But yeah, that's a really great point as well, right? Like if people don't use the feature, what are you going to do? But then again, going back to like some other like methods, like how do you get feedback? One thing that is kind of interesting, I think is very similar to something like software is, using your salespeople, maybe if you've got salespeople, as a way to gauge feedback. Like they didn't want to buy this thing. Why? What happened there?
Right. And your wait staff is your sales staff.
Exactly. Very similar to wait staff. Like, what did people say about this? You were listening to them. What did they say? And I think that's the kind of thing that I think very similar. Not every app has sales teams, obviously, but yeah, there's certainly a lot of overlap there.
It's really interesting. Back to the night of the broiled lobster. On Friday night, I did that broiled lobster, and we sold like 60 of them. The very next day, we sold 8.
What happened?
What happened? Like, is it the same people that were here from Friday night and they just didn't want it a second?
Yeah.
Can you do years of research in the dining room? Not really. Like to some degree you can, but I'm going to put microphones and record the conversations at each table.
You're being recorded.
It's research.
That was actually something interesting from the Bear. I don't know if this is normal, because I've never worked in a restaurant like this. But in the Bear, in the Forks episode, where Richie Cousin is working, he's listening, the waiters are listening, they're taking that information back to the kitchen and crafting an experience for individual customized experience for each individual table. Is that realistic? Does that actually happen in some of these fine dining restaurants?
I've never seen that happen. And my most fine dining moment in my life, yes, I worked out with Wolfgang Puck and that was pretty high level, but nothing compared to I ate at Stone Barns at Blue Hill.
I'm not familiar, but that doesn't mean anything. I'm not very cultured.
It was 20 courses, I want to say.
Good Lord,
it was like
be there all day.
Most insane experience. My cousin, it was just my cousin and I. She and I went. It was a bucket list item. We did it, I think, for my birthday, and it was unbelievably insane. But I really connected to the waiter. And we got some extras. He brought me to the kitchen. I got to meet Dan Barber, which was kind of like, a big deal for me, like fangirl. And we got to eat one course in the microgreens room where they grew the microgreens. So Blue Hill Stone Barns, everything awesome. There is grown in their agricultural center.
Oh, wow. Is that in New York? Where is that?
It's Tarrytown, upstate New York.
Okay.
So it's a whole experience. And like I said, every time we see each other, we talk about it. I always joke, it's like we had a threesome with Chris Hemsworth. Like we sit in the corner and we talk about it. Like, do you remember the course with the chocolate bread with the cherries in it? Oh my God. This is years ago. And we still talk about it. And we still look at each other across the room like we had the secret experience that nobody else had with us and nobody else could ever relate to.
This is like maybe another example of like a parallel, or maybe something to avoid in UX design or software, at least, is like understand, and this goes back, I think, to understanding your audience and your users, is crafting that experience. Some things are just completely unnecessary and a total waste of your time. And if you are a certain type of restaurant, having those microgreens and all this stuff, like having a table somewhere, it's like, that is not what people are here for.
No.
And I think the same can be said for software. It's like, we could do this stuff, whether it's, extra research maybe, or I don't know, extra features, or, you name it. But there's a certain point where you say, is this why people are here? Why are we building this? Is this necessary? Does this get the outcome that we want? And in that case, that is the outcome. The outcome there, I'm sure that experience has been crafted so that people remember that for years and they talk about it for years, right? Like that's the experience that you're going there for. And the cost, I'm sure, reflects that. But you've got like a mom and pop Italian shop down the street. Like that is not what you're going there. You're going for like a quick thing of meatballs and some pizza or something on a Friday night with the kids.
Meatballs.
Give me my Miller Lite, the coldest Miller Lite you got, some meatballs, and maybe some really great garlic bread. I'm done. I'm out. I'm going to go watch a movie with the kids. So like, it's like, you got to understand what it is. It's like, I think it goes back to UX design. Like a lot of people will try to apply this theory to the things that they're doing and assume that they need to do these every single time, or we're not going to, have the best experiences. The users are going to suffer, blah, blah, blah. There's a time and a place for all these various activities that we have to do. And you've got to understand why you're there and what you're trying to achieve, and whether or not that step that thing, whatever that thing is, that map, that process, blah, 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 whatever it is it necessary? Is it going to help us achieve that outcome at the end of the day? And I think that's like a huge takeaway, I think, for me.
Yeah. Like you push an update and now I hate your product.
Yeah. You broke it. It was fine before. Like
it was part of my life and you ruined it.
You ruined it. Like there's so many like reviews on the App Store. It's like this last update made it blah, blah, blah. And nah. So it's like people hate that stuff. But that's actually a really another thing. Like I don't know if there's a I don't know if there is a possibility to do this in restaurant, but like A/B testing, where you may give different tables different menus and see how different plates perform that night. I don't know if that's something people do. It might be
you could do it more effort. Night. I don't think you could do it in the same night.
Yeah, you're probably right. The same night. Yeah.
Yeah.
Or maybe every week
rough.
you try a different thing. You know what I mean? But that's like maybe an interesting kind of thing. I don't know if restaurants do that, but anyway, that could be like an interesting thing. Or maybe you change the names, you change the descriptions a little bit.
Oh, that's real. That is for real.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And see which ones sell. I don't know. Like that could be something you do each night. You give different tables, different menus, and see how the dishes perform based on the description. I don't know. Anyway, that's just like a thought. Anybody out there listening, try that. Let me know.
Yeah, let us know because I don't ever want to do it again.
Anne's not trying it, and I'm certainly not doing it again.
Anne looks forward to Mondays. She said she got back in the tech. I can't wait to get to work.
All right, Anne, anything else before we got some questions I'm going to ask you, let our listeners get to know our guests a little bit better. Before we do that, anything else that we didn't touch on that you think is important enough to share with everybody out there?
Don't let your kids go to culinary school.
Don't let them do it.
And watch The Bear.
Yeah, watch The Bear. That is I tell you what, my wife never worked in restaurants. She worked in like catering and stuff. She never worked in like restaurant kitchens and all that. And I don't think she appreciated it as much as I did. I'm watching this and it's funny because I was the couple of friends I was talking about that both work in restaurants. I asked them if they watched The Bear and they're like, no, not doing it. They're like, I don't, it's just too real.
It's a stress response.
Yeah, it was for sure. And I've been out of it long enough where I was like, it got me a little, nostalgic for those days. But you helped me kind of whip me back, pull me back from the edge a little bit.
I was grateful that finally the world could get a taste of the real, why it's rough, why they should make more money, why they need more benefits, why, we just go out to eat and don't really think about, the problems of the people who work there. And the people in the back have it hard.
They do. And they don't make a lot of money and they work a lot of hours and they often don't have benefits and everything else. And I don't think a lot of people realize that servers, make a decent amount of money with tips and stuff, but nobody's getting tipped out in the back. Busboys get tipped out. Nobody else gets tipped out, and they're probably making barely minimum wage. Hopefully, depends on where they are. Hopefully, they make more than that. But and I go get a job. Goddamn right. Convince your kids to get a job in the restaurant industry, waiting tables, bussing tables in high school, so they appreciate that, and they will be a better person for it. I guarantee you.
It's good parenting.
Yeah, unless they end up with like a coke habit, then
which can happen because it's.
But hopefully, you don't let them go in college. Hopefully, nobody's giving that crap to the high school kids. Probably kids in college. So don't, maybe college. It depends. But if you're going to college, wait tables because you'll make a lot more money. I promise. Don't work in the kitchen. It's funny. You mentioned you didn't have to go to like 1 p.m. When I was working in the restaurant, I had to be there at 6 a.m. to start prepping for the day. And we opened at 11 and I had to be there at 6. And that would be like after going out all night, drinking, getting home at like 2:30, 3 a.m.
Yeah, no.
That's what people end up with coke habits. All right.
That is part of it. Substance abuse is a real thing because you just need to get through your day. In the episode of The Bear, he's like, we'll be smoking cigarettes soon. And then he said to my husband, I said, you don't understand how strong of a statement that is because those cigarettes are the only joy. We don't get to eat. I don't smoke anymore, but we don't get to eat lunch. We're feeding everybody lunch. We don't get to eat dinner. We're feeding everybody dinner. Him saying we'll all be smoking cigarettes soon is the epitome of how rough that job is because that cigarette is the high point of your day.
Right.
That's pretty sad.
Yeah. And like someone like me, I never smoked. So like for me, I was just like, I have nothing.
And you had nothing.
I'm looking forward to that beer after we go to the bar down the street so I can give them all the money I made that night in tips.
Dessert.
Right. Just scarf it out. Yeah. No one's going to miss that chocolate lava cake, are they? So cool. All right, Ann. Well, this has been awesome. I love this idea, and I'm glad I got to share this with someone who actually was in the trenches much more than I ever was, and getting your feedback here. It's also nice to know that like I was a little bit correct. Some of the stuff I had to say, I was like, the cursory experience I had working in the kitchens for a few years in college. I did. Hopefully, I did. I think it taught me a thing or two.
It's a
So that's
transformative
it.
experience.
Really is. All right, Ann. So we got a few questions I like to ask all of my guests. Do you have a few minutes to stick around and answer these really silly questions?
Sure. Go for it.
First one, what is your favorite non-design book?
This is like asking somebody to choose their favorite kid, which I don't. I don't do.
All of them. I like them all. I like them all equally.
I will say it's a little cliche, but I love Anne Rice.
Okay. Yeah, the little connection in New Orleans there.
Yeah. But when it comes to authors, I love these are all. So the next three people I'm going to name are like chef gods to the chefs, and
Okay.
it's Rene Redzepi. He's Noma, Thomas Keller, and Eric Repair. Those three are like the chefs to the chefs.
Mm.
The highest level chefs look up to those guys. So anything they write is worth a read.
Do a lot of chefs write? I mean, Anthony Bourdain obviously comes to mind, but are there a lot of chefs that write books? Or are they ghostwritten? Are they actually writing them? Or
I think, well, I guess I should. So I worked for a celebrity chef
Mhm.
and we did a recipe book while I worked in that restaurant. And they would leave like one or two like twist ingredients out of those recipes. It was probably things you probably couldn't get very easily anyway.
Just so you didn't make it exactly the same.
Yes, exactly. So
Oh, it's funny.
and one of my favorite food books is Momofuku by David Chang.
Yeah.
Because it's a recipe book and like his life story in one book, and it's just an entertaining read.
Yeah, that's really cool.
So I won't pick one.
All right.
That's
fair.
you guys.
All right.
The
That's fair.
whole big answer.
That's fair. So, this is totally off topic of books, but speaking of celebrity chefs, the celebrity chef you work for, what do you have to say? What are your feelings about his infomercials? How do you feel?
I say, get that money, honey.
Get that money.
That's what I say.
Does he have any say in any of those products? He just licenses his name basically. It shows up for the recording of those things.
When I worked for him, he had like 5 restaurants in the LA area at the time. And he used to spend every day going from restaurant to restaurant to restaurant, talking to the chef, seeing what was up. Is that how it is now? Probably not. He's got restaurants all over the, as things get bigger and, their ability to be hands-on diminishes.
Back in high school, he didn't live in New Orleans, but Emerald had a bunch of restaurants in New Orleans. And I had a buddy who worked at Delmonico's, one of his restaurants downtown. And he said he would be in there pretty regularly. And if you crossed him though, watch out, because he was a giant. I don't want to character assassinate anybody, but apparently he was nice, but like if you did something you didn't like, watch out. So, which is like most chefs, I guess, but
yeah, it's a rough, it's like, it's just the personalities of the people who want those jobs. They're a hard group to keep in line. Yes. So you have to be a little bit of a drill sergeant.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And again, I think that's something that The Bear did a pretty good job of showing is some of those folks, like the I don't want to say attitude, the sassiness of some of them, maybe. I don't know. Attitude might be the right word.
And the guy who was like smoking crack in the middle of like, that's real. I've had people get arrested out of the back door.
We had the exact same thing happen at where I was working. The dishwasher was selling pot out the back door of the restaurant, and so like imagine that, like, like when you're the owner, you're like, what are you thinking, dude? Like,
no surprise. I had one guy get pulled off the line in handcuffs.
Oh my God.
I want to say he didn't pay child support.
Wow. Oh man. I was expecting something totally different when you mentioned that, but like, man, yeah, God, that's crazy. Well, I guess that's probably like the only place I could find him was at work.
It's a hard gig, and it attracts a rough crowd. And the fact that it's hard gig makes that rough crowd even rougher over time.
I'm just thinking about, like, how does a dude pay child support? You take him off. You take him off with a shift. Where's he going to get money from? I mean, it's such a stupid way to, I don't know. It's a stupid way to penalize somebody.
I'm pretty sure that's what it was.
Yeah.
Go
All right.
ahead.
What's your favorite non-design pod? Or that's what they told everybody. Could have been some way for. What's your favorite non-design podcast?
You know what's funny? Outside of yours and Darren Hood's, I really don't listen to that many podcasts.
Oh, you lumped me and Darren Hood together. I'm honored. Thank you.
And those are both design. And what's the sad part is, I dabble in interior design and other kind of design like that when I'm not doing, like tech based work. So like I like to watch things at like home reno and that kind of stuff. So I'll YouTube and listen to that
That's
stuff on
somewhat
TV.
similar. I mean, it's a visual-ish podcast.
Yeah. I mean, I was raised by an engineer and an art teacher. So I just kind of came up always having my hands in clay or mosaic or crayons or paint or whatever. So to me, that's downtime and fun, even though it's sort of related to work.
No, I feel you. I feel the same way. I mean, I love doing that kind of stuff. Like for me, downtime is doing this kind of crap. So
yeah, exactly.
All right. What is your favorite meal? This is a hard one probably for you to answer as a chef, but
nope.
Is it easy?
This is an easy one.
What is it?
I like to go to Flushing, Queens, to a dirty Vietnamese restaurant and have a big bowl of pho.
I'm with you, man. Oh, I love that. Yeah, that's one thing I miss about New Orleans. We had a lot of Vietnamese restaurants. We had a huge Vietnamese.
Yeah.
Oh my God. And it's like some of those restaurants. Yes. Oh my God. We call them po' boys out there, Vietnamese po' boys. You know, what's funny? When I moved to Cincinnati, one of the guys was like, yeah, we're going to get some Vietnamese hoagies for lunch. I was like, all right, I see. All right. We did the same thing with po' boys. I get it.
The gift of being in the part of New York I'm in is being able to get to Flushing, Queens, and any Asian food in Flushing.
Oh God, yeah.
Mochi donuts.
Oh man. Yeah, you guys have, I'm jealous. Y'all got like, I mean, there's literally anything. I remember one time years ago, my wife and I would just go to New York for the weekend. Like we'd get a $100 flight and we'd stay at these like little hotel that didn't even have a bathroom, like hall bathrooms, like $100 a night. We just stay,
like a hostel.
Yeah. And we would go and the itinerary would just be restaurants. It'd just be, I want this ethnicity, that thing, this thing, that thing. And that's how we would plan our trips,
Yeah.
And God, I remember we had like all kinds of stuff. Like for me, being from New Orleans, like, New Orleans is known as like a food city, but it's New Orleans food. Like we don't really have other ethnicities other than Vietnamese. We have really good Vietnamese. But like there's Indian food is terrible down there. Like there's not a lot of, niche, I guess, for lack of a better word, ethnic restaurants down there. So going to New York and it's like, I don't know, we had like Nepalese food. We had like, some kind of
Ethiopian.
we had Ethiopian, but there was another like African region. I can't remember the region, but it was like I've never even heard of the region before. It was just something African, but it was like Afghanistan. We have like, there's an Afghani restaurant that we went to, but yeah, stuff like that, like Iranian, there's an Iranian restaurant, Persian restaurant.
Upside of New York.
Anyway, I miss that stuff. One day when my kids are old enough to leave them home, that's when I can travel by myself.
They get old enough that you get to leave.
Is that happening soon? When does that happen? I can't wait.
It will come.
Oh my God.
You just have to live long.
That's the trick. Hopefully they don't like kill me first. All right. What is your favorite vacation spot?
I go to Vermont a lot, but I'm happy any place where I'm in the mountains, in the woods with a fire.
I love it.
That's it. That's all I need.
Where. And New York, you got a lot of stuff around you where you could do that. So,
but my number one on my bucket list is I want to sleep under the Aurora Borealis. That's number one. And then number two, I want to do like a food tour of Europe.
Yeah. Would you do like a tour? Would you just make your own tour? You do your own tour. Just do your own tour.
No tour.
Anne's tour.
I'm a Rolling Stone.
Yeah, that's not gonna. And it probably wouldn't be that expensive. It'd just be expensive getting there. Would be the hard part.
No, and I'm a researcher, so I could do my research and figure out where I want to go. I'd like to do the Anthony Bourdain food tour of the world and just go everywhere he said to go.
Ooh, God, that'd be good. Oh man, Anthony Bourdain, I love him. All right, what is your favorite design tool that is not Figma?
Paper and magic markers.
Why markers? Why markers specifically? Usually people say pen. You like the big fat
colors.
Tip? Ah, okay.
I like the double-sided ones, like this one.
Oh,
it's got a fat tip.
Yeah.
And I don't like cheap markers that stop working after 2 minutes.
Yeah. Speaking of which, this was my mistake. I did never do this again. I went and bought these cheap sticky notes. They're not even
off Post-its.
Yeah. Oh, they're
dollar store.
awful. They do not work. They don't stick. Oh, they're so bad. And then I have this
You
one.
make mini paper airplanes out of them.
Like this one. Yeah, look at this. This is the stupidest thing. It's like, nobody can see this at home, but it's like an accordion.
Use it as streamers
Which
for a party.
sounds fun, except like you're constantly having to flip it around. Your sticky notes are upside down, and then it doesn't stick. So like you write something what you think is right side up, and it's upside down, and then it falls. Such a I never
You're
buy
GE Aeronautics, right?
Aerospace.
Yes. Bring them to work and tell the guys to turn them into paper airplanes, so they're not a complete waste.
That's a really good idea. Like a bunch of these little things, that'd be fun. Anyway, so cheap stickies, cheap markers. Just go with the good stuff.
Well,
it's worth the money.
Your designs, I think, the root of your designs need to happen in your mind, not in Figma. And the easiest way to get things out of your minds and into the world is on paper.
All right, Anne. Well, that is it for us for today. I really appreciate you coming on. This was fantastic for me. I know you don't want anybody to go work in restaurants and anything like that, but I still get this little itch. I get this itch every once in a while. I want to go bartend or something. I want
kids to work in restaurants.
Not adults. Once you've done it, you can't do it again. No going back.
During high school and college.
Yeah.
But don't go to culinary school to become a chef. Unless you were maybe in Vegas, they have a union and they take care of.
Really? I didn't know that.
Maybe some places in New York City, but in general, it's a rough ride.
Yes, it is. It is a rough ride.
I don't want to. If it's your passion and you love it, that's cool. Do it as a hobby and get a job that actually pays.
I meant to tell you this before, but down in New Orleans, right in my old neighborhood, actually, there was a place called Appetite Repair Shop, and this guy Peter Vasquez, he's a former chef. He had like a fancy fine dining restaurant in New Orleans for a long time. After Katrina, he's just like, you know what? Fuck it. I'm done. I can't do this anymore. He bought a house, turned the bottom into a window, and he just makes these amazing menus. One thing, he'll have a main, a couple sides, and a dessert. And he makes some little like prepackaged things you could buy if you want. But that's it. That's all he does. And when he's out, and it's just him. And like that's what he does. And he bought the house. He lives there. He does that, and he only does it like 3 nights a week, I think. It's called Appetite Repair Shop down in New Orleans. If anybody, I think it's still. I haven't been there in a while. But, it's so good. Oh my God, yeah. And he takes off whenever he wants. He actually he went and helped I think earthquake victims at one point, and flood victims, hurricane victims somewhere, and he would just go and like cook for them and stuff. And he made his money. He sold his restaurant and stuff. So like that's all he does. And there's no stress. He doesn't have to deal with employees. Doesn't deal with dishwashers not showing up, and all that crap. He doesn't have to deal with sassy employees talking back.
Sounds like he found his way.
That's it. But it took him a while to get there. But anyway, that's not something you could just do right out of the bat. But cool. All right, Anne. Well, I really appreciate you coming on. This has been an amazing episode. A little long, but that's all right. I think this is a good one. And if you haven't seen The Bear, go check it out. At this point, it's probably too late. But if you haven't seen The Bear, go check it out. It's fantastic, fantastic show. Highly recommend it. Well, all right, y'all. That's it for Anne and me for today. I hope we helped to shed a little bit of light on the restaurant industry and how running a restaurant has a lot of similarities with building great software. But I'm curious, how many of you out there have worked in restaurants? Did you get the same feeling when you started working in software? Did you notice some of these similarities? Or are we just completely insane? Let us know what you think on LinkedIn or shoot me an email at hello@beyonduxdesign.com. I'd love to hear from you. If you like what you heard today, don't forget to subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. And if you feel like you're getting something out of the show, I would love it if you left a 5-star review. That would help me out so much more than you know. And if you know somebody who might find any of this stuff useful, then why don't you tell them about it? That would be fantastic. If you want to help keep the show independent and ad-free, check out all those Patreon sponsorship packages at beyonduxdesign.com/support. You can join Chris, Sarah, Quan, Stacy, Radu, Megan, Andrew, John, Mark, and Kevin by supporting the show for as little as $3 a month. And there's some awesome perks like that badass holographic Beyond UX Design sticker. You can get a shout on the show every week. There's even a package to meet with me for 30 minutes every month. Don't forget to head on over to beyonduxdesign.com/audible trial to download Kitchen Confidential by Anthony Bourdain. Sign up for a free 30-day Audible trial. Cancel at any time, and the book is yours to keep forever. And in case you forgot, I've partnered with Audible.com, so anytime you sign up for a free trial, you'll help support the show. There's no obligation. You can cancel anytime, and the audiobook is yours to keep forever. So get a free audiobook on me and help support the show. Do yourself a favor and head on over to beyonduxdesign.com/storytelling and use the code BeyondUX at checkout to get 10% off Jeff's storytelling course to learn some super valuable ways to influence your team and advance your UX career. Remember to sign up for the newsletter and check out all the past episodes along with all the show notes at beyonduxdesign.com. I hope you keep coming back for more great UX tips from Beyond UX Design. And until next time, remember, you're more than a designer because there's more to UX and design. I'll see you around. Take care, y'all. I work with a woman whose cat snorts. So like she'll be in meetings and like all of a sudden you hear like, because her cat's always on her keyboard and stuff. It's the funniest thing.